Hello there, and welcome to the Daily Dose of Lore. Tonight, we're diving into some of the most famous creepypastas on the internet, stories you might know, like Slenderman, and others you've probably never heard of. But one thing's for sure, every single one of them is chilling. If you're enjoying the videos, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Now, let's begin. Slenderman. The entity known as Slenderman first appeared on June 10, 2009, in a thread on the Something Awful forums. The thread was simple in its premise. Users were invited to create paranormal images by editing ordinary photographs. A user named Victor Surge, whose real name was Eric Knudsen, posted 2 black and white photographs that would birth a legend. The first image showed a group of children on a playground, and there, in the background, partially obscured by trees, stood an unnaturally tall figure in a dark suit. Its limbs seemed too long, its proportions wrong in a way that unsettled the eye. The second photograph depicted children walking toward a wooded area, and again the figure was present, watching from between the trees. What made Surge's creation different from the other entries was the text he included beneath the images, written as though they were recovered documents. "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time," read one caption, attributed to a photographer on the day of his disappearance. Another mentioned 14 children who vanished when a local library caught fire, the photographer himself found dead, and the figure present in the smoke. Within days, other forum users began adding to the mythology. They created their own photographs, their own documents, their own accounts of encounters with the Slenderman. The entity gained attributes through this collective storytelling. It was described as standing between 6 and 15 feet tall, wearing a black suit that seemed almost part of its body. Its face was blank, featureless, a smooth white surface where eyes and mouth should be. Some accounts gave it multiple arms, or tentacle-like appendages that emerged from its back. It was said to stalk its victims for years before taking them, that it had a particular interest in children, that those who saw it began to suffer from what became known as slender sickness, nosebleeds, paranoia, nightmares, and memory loss. The mythology established that Slenderman could not be escaped. It did not run, it did not need to. It simply appeared closer each time, patient as stone. To see it was to be chosen by it, and to be chosen was to be taken, eventually, inevitably. Photographs of the entity became corrupted, showing visual artifacts and distortions. Video footage would tear and skip. It was as though the creature existed just slightly out of phase with our reality, and technology struggled to capture it. But Slenderman's true explosion into cultural consciousness came through a YouTube series called Marble Hornets, which began in June of 2009, the same month as Surge's original posts. Created by Troy Wagner and Joseph DeLege, the series presented itself as found footage, the recovered tapes of a canceled student film project. The creator of that fictional film, a young man named Alex, had abandoned the project suddenly and without explanation. As the protagonist Jay began reviewing the old tapes, he discovered why. A tall, suited figure appeared in the background of shot after shot, and Alex's behavior had grown increasingly erratic and paranoid. Marble Hornets ran for 5 years and 87 entries, creating an intricate narrative that expanded the Slenderman mythology significantly. The series introduced the operator symbol, a circle with an X through it, which became synonymous with the entity. It established that Slenderman could teleport its victims, erase their memories, and bend them to its will through proxies, ordinary people driven to serve its unknowable purposes. The series also demonstrated that even knowing about Slenderman, even researching it, could draw its attention to you. Other web series followed. Everyman Hybrid and Tribe 12 created their own expansions of the mythology, linking their narratives together into a shared universe of Slenderman terror. Video games emerged, most notably Slender, the 8 pages, in which players wandered a dark forest collecting pages while the entity hunted them. The game's simple mechanics and overwhelming atmosphere of dread made it a phenomenon, watched by millions through YouTube gaming channels. The appeal of Slenderman lay in its ambiguity. It had no clear motive, no origin story that everyone agreed upon, no rules that couldn't be bent or broken. It was fear in its purest form. The unknown, the unseen, the thing that watches from the tree line. It tapped into ancient archetypes, the fear of the dark, the fear of the forest, the fear of something wearing the shape of a man, but being anything but human. Slenderman crossed from internet legend into mainstream awareness, and then, tragically, into real-world horror. In 2014, in Waukesha, Wisconsin, two 12-year-old girls lured a classmate into the woods and harmed her grievously, later telling police they did it to prove themselves to Slenderman, whom they believed was real. The victim survived, but the case cast a long shadow over the creepypasta community and raised difficult questions about the line between fiction and belief, especially for young people. The incident was a stark reminder that stories have power, and that power must be treated with respect. Today, Slenderman remains one of the most recognizable horror creations of the 21st century. It has appeared in films, books, and countless pieces of fan art. But perhaps its most significant legacy is in what it represents, the first great monster of the internet age, born not from one author's imagination, but from the collective creativity of thousands, shaped and reshaped with each retelling until it became something larger than any single story could contain. In the darkness between the trees, in the corner of photographs you have to look twice to see, the tall figure still stands, watching, waiting, patient as it has always been, Jeff the Killer. The image appeared first, as so many creepypasta legends do. A face, pale as bleached bone, with a wide smile that stretched too far across the cheeks and eyes that seemed to have no lids, ringed in black as though burned or stained. The origin of that image has been debated for years, with various theories pointing to edited photographs or even Halloween masks. But its power was immediate and undeniable. It was a face that seemed designed to appear at the foot of your bed at 3 in the morning, and once you saw it, you could not unsee it. The story that accompanied the image solidified in 2011, though earlier versions existed. It told the tale of a boy named Jeffrey Woods, who moved with his family to a new neighborhood and whose life would be utterly destroyed in a matter of weeks. Jeff was described as a relatively normal teenager, perhaps a bit quiet, who lived with his parents and his brother Liu. Shortly after moving to their new home, the brothers encountered a group of bullies while waiting for their school bus. The confrontation turned violent, and Jeff discovered something within himself that day, an ability to fight, a capacity for violence that felt almost natural. When police arrived, Liu took the blame for the altercation to protect his brother, and was sent away to a juvenile detention center. The guilt ate at Jeff, the wrongness of his brother taking his punishment, the strangeness of how alive he had felt during the fight, the way his mother looked at him now with something that might have been fear. He began to feel ill, or perhaps he began to change, his mind reshaping itself around the violence he had both witnessed and inflicted. The bullies returned during a birthday party at a neighbor's house. This time, they brought weapons, and they were not interested in a fair fight. They attacked Jeff with such brutality that by the end of the confrontation, his face had been severely burned. In the original story, he was doused in alcohol and set alight, the flames consuming his features before he could be saved. Jeff survived. But what emerged from the hospital bandages was no longer the boy who had moved to the neighborhood weeks before. His face had been transformed, the skin pale and leathery, pulled tight by the burns. But it was what he did after seeing his reflection that completed his metamorphosis into something no longer human. According to the story, Jeff altered his own appearance to match the image in his fractured mind. He carved his face to create a permanent smile so that he would never have to expend energy on smiling again. He burned away his eyelids so that he could always see his beautiful face. When his mother discovered him in the bathroom and screamed, Jeff's sanity already hanging by a thread, finally snapped. His family did not survive the night. Only Lou, still in detention, was spared, though some versions of the story suggest that he too would eventually fall victim to his brother, or would become something monstrous himself in his quest for revenge. Jeff became a wanderer, a figure who drifted from town to town, entering homes in the dead of night. He would stand over his sleeping victims and whisper 4 words before ending their lives: "Go to sleep." The phrase became iconic, repeated across the internet until it was as recognizable as Jeff's bleached, smiling face. The Jeff the Killer story spawned countless sequels, spin-offs, and related characters. Jane the Killer was created as his nemesis, a survivor of one of his attacks who hunted him across the country. Lou, his brother, was reimagined as homicidal Liu, afflicted with dissociative identity disorder as a result of his family's murder. The character became a staple of creepypasta fan art and fan fiction, one of the most popular horror icons to emerge from the internet age. Critics have pointed out that the original story is not particularly well written, with logical inconsistencies and prose that veers into the melodramatic, but the character's popularity has never been about the quality of the original text. It was about that image, that face, grinning from the darkness. It was about the simplicity of the concept, a killer who could be anywhere, who whispered those words before the end, who was once an ordinary boy until the world twisted him into something else. Jeff the Killer endures because he represents a particular kind of horror, the horror of transformation, of becoming something unrecognizable to yourself and everyone who knew you. The bullies broke his body, but it was Jeff himself who completed the destruction, reshaping himself into the monster he felt he was always meant to be. His story asks an uncomfortable question: how much pressure does it take to break a person completely, and what emerges from the pieces? The answer grins at us from computer screens and bedroom shadows, forever smiling, forever watching, forever whispering its 4-word command: Ben drowned. In September of 2010, a user named Jaducible began posting to the paranormal board of 4chan with a story that would redefine what creepypasta could be. It was not merely a written account, but a multimedia experience, combining text, video footage, and eventually an alternate reality game that blurred the lines between fiction and reality in ways that had rarely been attempted before. The story began simply enough. Jaducible, a college student, was browsing a yard sale in his neighborhood when he came across an old man selling various items, including a Nintendo 64 cartridge. The cartridge was for The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask, a game already renowned for its dark themes, unsettling atmosphere, and the ever-present moon that threatened to destroy the world of Termina. The old man seemed eager to be rid of it, mentioning that it had belonged to someone named Ben, who no longer lived there. When Jaducible returned home and began playing, he noticed something strange. A save file already existed on the cartridge, named simply Ben. Thinking nothing of it, he started his own file and began to play. But the game did not behave as it should. Characters referred to him as Ben, even though he had named his character Link. The happy mask salesman appeared in places he should not be, his wide grin filling the screen. Statues of the game's main character, known as Elegy of Emptiness statues, began appearing where they had no business being, staring with their hollow eyes. Jaducible deleted the Ben save file, thinking it might fix the glitches. It did not. The game grew worse, more chaotic. Now the characters called him nothing at all, leaving blank spaces where his name should be. The music played backwards, or not at all. He began encountering events that were not part of the game, sequences that seemed to have been created specifically to disturb him. And the statue, that eyeless statue, seemed to follow him everywhere, appearing behind him whenever he turned around. The brilliance of Ben Drowned lay in the video evidence that accompanied the written posts. Jaducible uploaded footage to YouTube showing the corrupted gameplay, and viewers could see with their own eyes the impossible things he described. The reversed Song of Healing, the Elegy statue stalking him through Clocktown, the screen filling with the words, "You shouldn't have done that," and "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" The story evolved over several posts. Judiciable began to suspect that whatever haunted the cartridge was not simply a glitch, but a presence, something aware and malevolent. He learned that Ben had been a boy who drowned years before, and that somehow his spirit, or something wearing his memory, had become trapped in the game. When Judiciable tried to flee, tried to abandon the cartridge, the entity followed him. It appeared in his other games. It appeared on his computer. It knew his name. The final post became increasingly fragmented and paranoid. Judiciable uploaded one last video showing the gameplay at its most corrupted, and then went silent. In his place, an account called The Truth appeared, claiming to be the entity itself, now freed from the cartridge and existing on the internet, where it could spread to anyone who viewed the videos or read the posts. The implication was clear and chilling. By reading this story, by watching this footage, you too might have invited something in. Judiciable revealed in subsequent years that Ben Drowned was indeed a work of fiction, an elaborate art project inspired by his love of Majora's Mask and his desire to create horror that used the unique properties of the internet. The story continued in various forms, including a planned alternate reality game called The Moon Children that expanded the mythology but was never fully completed. What made Ben Drowned so effective was its understanding of its medium. It was not just a story, but an experience, one that used video and interactivity to create something that felt participatory. Viewers were not passive recipients, but potential victims, warned that even watching could have consequences. It also tapped into something specific to its generation, the nostalgia and unease of old video games, those chunky polygons and eerie musical cues, the sense that we were never quite sure what was happening in those digital worlds when we turned off the console. The entity Ben has become one of the most enduring figures in creepypasta lore, appearing in countless fanworks and adaptations. But more than the character itself, Ben Drowned's legacy is in what it proved was possible. That internet horror could be immersive, multimedia, and boundary-breaking in ways that traditional fiction could not. Somewhere, perhaps, a cartridge sits in a dusty box, waiting to be found. And somewhere in the game's code, a statue stands motionless, its empty eyes patient, its hollow face fixed in a smile that knows you're watching. The Russian Sleep Experiment. The story is set in the late 1940s in a Soviet research facility that does not appear on any map. Russian researchers, eager to develop a method of keeping soldiers awake and alert for extended periods, have created a stimulant gas that they believe can eliminate the need for sleep entirely. To test it, they select 5 political prisoners, enemies of the state, who have been promised freedom if they can remain awake for 30 days. The prisoners are placed in a sealed chamber with cots, running water, toilet facilities, and enough dried food to last the month. Microphones in the walls allow the researchers to monitor their conversations, and small porthole windows let them observe the subjects directly. The gas begins to flow, and the experiment begins. The first few days proceed without incident. The prisoners are nervous, but relatively calm, spending their time talking about their lives, their families, the freedom they hope to earn. The researchers note that the gas appears to be working. Despite the extended wakefulness, the subjects show no signs of the usual sleep deprivation symptoms. No irritability, no loss of coordination, no cognitive decline. By the 5th day, things begin to change. The prisoners stop talking about their lives and start talking about each other, paranoid whispers about betrayal and conspiracy. They begin to show signs of stress, pacing the chamber, glancing at the portholes with suspicion. One prisoner begins screaming for hours at a time, running the length of the chamber until he can scream no more. By the 9th day, the screaming stops. 2 of the prisoners have stopped speaking entirely. The others whisper endlessly into the microphones, their words becoming increasingly difficult to understand. The researchers notice that the prisoners have begun tearing pages from books and pasting them over the portholes with their own excrement, blocking any view into the chamber. Days pass with nothing but whispers and silence. The researchers cannot see what is happening inside. The microphones capture only faint sounds, rustling, occasional screams cut short, and always the endless whispers. They debate whether to abort the experiment, but their superiors insist they continue. On the 14th day, the researchers try to communicate through the intercom, promising additional food if the prisoners will step away from the portholes. The voice that answers is calm, reasonable, and utterly wrong. We no longer want to be freed. On the 15th day, with the experiment half complete, the researchers make a decision. The gas is flushed from the chamber and replaced with fresh air. Immediately, the voices inside begin to scream, not in relief, but in protest. They beg for the gas to be returned. They demand to be kept awake. When the chamber is finally unsealed and armed soldiers enter, they discover what 15 days without sleep has created. The original story describes the scene in graphic detail, but we need only understand that the prisoners had suffered terribly and inflicted terrible suffering upon themselves. They had become something other than what they were, changed by the sleeplessness into creatures that no longer wished to return to normal consciousness. When one of the surviving subjects was asked what he was, what all of them had become, he gave an answer that has echoed across the internet for over a decade. He spoke of the darkness inside all human minds, the thing that surfaces only when we are too tired to keep it at bay. Sleep, he claimed, was humanity's protection from itself. The horror was not in the chamber. The horror was what they became when nothing held it back anymore. The Russian sleep experiment is not a true story, despite its clinical tone and historical setting. It first appeared on the Creepypasta wiki in 2010, authored anonymously. But it has persisted because it speaks to something true about human fear, the terror of losing oneself, of becoming something monstrous, of discovering that the darkness we fear outside was inside us all along. It asks what we might become if we never closed our eyes, never let our minds rest and process and forget. It suggests that perhaps we need sleep not merely to restore our bodies, but to suppress something that would otherwise consume us. In the silence of the night, when sleep will not come, the mind sometimes wanders to dark places. The Russian sleep experiment suggests those places are always there, waiting. Sleep is the locked door. Wakefulness is the key. Some doors are better left closed. Smile Dog. The image, when you finally see it, shows a Siberian husky in dim lighting, its face twisted into what can only be described as a grin. The dog's features are wrong somehow. The smile too wide, too human, filled with teeth that catch the light. A human hand rests on its head, emerging from the darkness of the frame. This is Smile JPG, though some know it as Smile Dog, and according to the story, viewing it is only the beginning of your problems. The story is presented as an account from a writer, an amateur journalist interested in urban legends and internet folklore, who has been researching the image and its effects for years. The main narrative focuses on his attempt to interview a woman named Mary E., who is said to have been one of the image's earliest victims. When the writer arrives at Mary's home, he finds her in poor condition. She has not left her house in years. She suffers from constant nightmares and what she calls waking dreams. Visions of the creature from the image appearing at the foot of her bed, in the corner of her room, standing behind her in mirrors. She refuses to discuss the image in detail, growing increasingly agitated whenever the writer presses her. She tells him only that there is a way to make it stop, but it requires spreading the image to others, accompanied by the words, "Spread the word." The writer leaves without the full story, and Mary contacts him days later. She is more coherent now, calmer, and she wants to tell him everything. She received the image in 1992 in the early days of the internet, via a floppy disk from someone she trusted. When she viewed it, she saw not just the dog, but something else, something in the background that her mind could not fully process. That night, the dreams began. The creature visits her every night. It does not speak, but it does not need to. Its message is clear: spread the word, or the visits will never stop. Mary has resisted for years, refusing to inflict on others what was inflicted on her. But the resistance has cost her everything: her career, her relationships, her mental health, her ability to function in the world. The writer asks why she has finally decided to talk. Mary tells him that she has made her decision. That night, Mary takes her own life. In her possessions, the writer finds the original floppy disk. Despite everything he has learned, despite Mary's fate and the years of suffering she described, he is tempted. The story ends with him sitting at his computer, the disk in hand, wrestling with the urge to view the image himself. The implication is that you, the reader, have already lost. By reading this story, by seeking out the image, you have invited the dog into your life. The only question now is whether you will spread the word, or if you will try to resist as Mary did and share her fate. Smile Dog is one of the older creepypastas, with versions of the story circulating since the mid-2000s. Its power lies in its simplicity and its connection to a long tradition of cursed objects and chain letters. The idea that viewing an image can bring supernatural harm is ancient, appearing in stories of evil eyes, cursed paintings, and forbidden sights throughout human history. Smile Dog updates this concept for the internet age, where images spread instantly and viewing something takes only a click. The actual image associated with the story has been shared thousands of times. Some versions are clearly amateur edits, others more sophisticated. None of them are dangerous, of course. They are just pictures, pixels on a screen. But the story asks us to consider what we invite into our minds when we view things, how images can linger and fester, appearing in our thoughts when we least expect them. Perhaps you've already searched for smile.jpg. Perhaps you've seen the grinning face and felt a small shiver, quickly dismissed. Perhaps tonight, as you lie in darkness, waiting for sleep, you'll think of it again. The dog, the hand, the smile that knows something you don't. Spread the word. The Rake. Unlike many creepypastas that spring from a single author's imagination, The Rake was born from collaboration, shaped by dozens of anonymous voices into something that felt less like fiction and more like recovered folklore. In the summer of 2005, users on 4chan's random board decided to create a new monster, something that could stand alongside legendary creatures like Bigfoot or the Mothman. They began with a set of characteristics. It should be humanoid, but not human. It should be encountered in bedrooms, and it should be named something short and unsettling. From these parameters, the Rake emerged. The creature is described as pale and hairless, its skin the color of old bone or dirty snow. It moves on all fours, but can stand upright, reaching a height of roughly 6 feet when it does. Its limbs are long and thin, ending in hands with fingers that taper into points, black and sharp as the garden tool from which it takes its name. Its face is the most disturbing element: large, dark eyes that reflect light like a cat's, a lipless mouth, and an expression that observers have described as curious, almost thoughtful, as though it is studying whoever has the misfortune to see it. The story that accompanies the Rake is presented as a compilation of recovered documents spanning several centuries. A mariner's log from 1761 describes an encounter with a creature that matches the Rake's description, found hiding in the cargo hold of a ship. A journal entry from 1880 speaks of a thing that came to a woman's bedside and whispered secrets that drove her to take her own life. A note from 1964, left by a suicide victim, mentions being followed for years by something that would sit at the foot of his bed and watch him sleep. But the most detailed account comes from a modern witness, presented as testimony given in 2006. The witness describes waking in the night to find the Rake crouched at the foot of the bed, staring at his wife. When she woke and saw it, the creature attacked. In the chaos that followed, the family escaped the bedroom, but their young daughter had also encountered the thing in the hallway. She survived her injuries, but spoke of what the Rake had whispered to her, words that the account does not reveal, but that left her changed, haunted by knowledge she should never have possessed. The effectiveness of the Rake lies in its violation of our most sacred space, the bedroom, the place where we are most vulnerable. Sleep paralysis has made many people familiar with the terror of sensing a presence in the room while being unable to move, and the rake taps directly into this primal fear. It does not chase its victims or hunt them through forests. It simply appears where they sleep, watches them in their most defenseless state, and whispers things that break their minds. The collaborative nature of the rake's creation also gives it a peculiar authenticity. Because no single author claims ownership, because the details were assembled from many voices, the creature feels less like an invention and more like something that was always there, waiting to be described. The historical documents, though fictional, create a sense that the rake has existed alongside humanity for centuries, glimpsed occasionally but never understood. What does it want? Why does it watch? What does it whisper to those unfortunate enough to hear its voice? The story provides no answers, and that absence of explanation is perhaps the most frightening element of all. The rake is not evil in any way we can understand. It simply exists, curious about us, visiting us in the night for reasons we will never know. If you wake tonight and feel that you are not alone, that something crouches in the darkness at the edge of your vision, you will tell yourself it is nothing, a shadow, a dream, and perhaps you will be right. Perhaps. Eyeless Jack. The story begins with a college student named Mitch moving into a new house with his brother Edwin. It is an ordinary house in an ordinary town, and for the first few weeks, nothing unusual occurs. Then, Mitch begins waking in the night with the sense that someone has been in his room. He dismisses it as anxiety, the stress of a new environment, but the feeling persists. One night, Mitch wakes to see a figure sitting in the chair beside his bed. In the darkness, he can make out only a shape, humanoid, motionless, watching him. He convinces himself it is Edwin playing a prank and goes back to sleep. But the next morning, Edwin denies being in his room, and Mitch notices something troubling, a small streak of blood on his pillow. The visitations continue. Each time Mitch wakes, the figure is there, sitting in the same chair, its features impossible to distinguish in the dark. Each morning, there is more blood on his pillow, and Mitch begins to feel weak, drained, as though something is being taken from him in the night. He sets up a camera to record himself sleeping, hoping to catch Edwin in the act. What the camera captures is not his brother. The footage shows the figure entering through his window in the middle of the night. It moves with unsettling fluidity, crossing to his bed and leaning over him. Its face comes into view, and Mitch finally sees what has been visiting him. The figure wears a blue mask, featureless, except for two dark holes where the eyes should be. From those holes, a black, tar-like substance oozes down its cheeks like tears. It has no other distinguishing features, no expression, no humanity. It leans close to Mitch's sleeping form, and the footage shows it doing something to his side, something the camera angle mercifully obscures. Mitch rushes to the hospital, where doctors make a disturbing discovery. His kidney is missing, removed with surgical precision despite no visible incision, no scar, no explanation for how it was taken. The creature became known as Eyeless Jack, and the story spawned numerous fan interpretations and origin tales. Some claim he was once a medical student who became the victim of a cult ritual, his eyes sacrificed to a demon that now inhabits his body. Others suggest he is something that was never human at all, merely wearing human form to get close to its prey. What everyone agrees on is his diet. He feeds on human organs, kidneys in particular, taken from sleeping victims who never know what they've lost until it's too late. Eyeless Jack became one of the most popular creepypasta characters, appearing in countless stories, fan art, and even video games. The blue mask became iconic, as recognizable in creepypasta circles as Jason's hockey mask or Michael Myers' white face. But unlike those slasher villains, Eyeless Jack does not kill his victims. He takes only what he needs and leaves them alive, perhaps to visit again when the remaining organs have become tempting. The horror of Eyeless Jack is bodily violation, the fear that something can take pieces of us without our knowledge or consent. We trust that our bodies are our own, that we would know if something were wrong, if something were missing. Eyeless Jack suggests that this trust is misplaced. In the night, while we sleep, anything might happen. We are not in control of our own flesh. If you've been feeling tired lately, drained, weak in ways you can't explain, there's probably a reasonable explanation. Stress, poor diet, not enough sleep. But you might want to check your windows before bed tonight, and perhaps leave a camera running, just in case. Candle Cove. The format is what makes it unforgettable. The story is presented not as a narrative, but as a series of forum posts, members of a small online community reminiscing about a television show they watched as children in the early 1970s. The show was called Candle Cove, and as the conversation develops, it becomes clear that something was very wrong with it. The first poster remembers only fragments: a pirate ship, puppets, a theme song that was hard to make out. Others chime in with their own memories, and the details begin to accumulate. The show featured a little girl named Janice who interacted with puppet pirates, including one called Pirate Percy, who was always afraid and seemed to be warning Janice about something. There was a villain named the Skin Taker, a skeleton who wore a cape made of children's skin and whose jaw moved only side to side, not up and down when he spoke. The memories grow darker as the conversation continues. One user recalls an episode that was just the characters screaming for the entire runtime. Another remembers being deeply disturbed by the Skin Taker and asking a parent what he did with the children's skin. The answer, supposedly given on the show itself, was to make myself more comfortable. The users discussed the show's inexplicable hold over them, how they were terrified but couldn't stop watching, how they would wake from nightmares about it. Then one poster mentions asking their mother about Candle Cove, expecting to finally get some answers about the obscure show that has haunted them for 30 years. The mother remembers them watching it. She remembers them sitting in front of the television every day, completely transfixed. She also remembers that whenever the show was on, the television was tuned to static. There was no show. There was nothing but snow and white noise, and her child sitting before it, staring, not responding when she spoke, completely absorbed in something only they could see. The story ends there, with that revelation hanging in the air. The forum posters do not respond to this final message. There is nothing to say. Candle Cove was written by Chris Straub in 2009, and it is widely considered one of the finest creepypastas ever created. Its power comes from several sources. The format feels authentic, like something you might stumble across while browsing old forum archives, and the casual tone of the conversation makes the creeping horror more effective. The details accumulate slowly, each post adding something slightly more disturbing than the last, until the final revelation recontextualizes everything. But more than technique, Candle Cove taps into something universal: the unreliability of childhood memory. We all have shows we watched as children that we can barely remember, fragments of images and sounds that feel more like dreams than actual experiences. What if those memories were never real? What if we sat in front of screens, seeing things that weren't there, responding to signals only we could receive? The story was adapted into the first season of the television series Channel Zero in 2016, expanding the mythology while maintaining the central mystery. But the original remains a masterpiece of minimalist horror, proving that sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that leave the most to the imagination. Static fills the screen. White noise hisses from the speakers. And if you look closely, just at the edge of perception, shapes begin to form. A ship, a skeleton, a little girl who looks so much like someone you used to know. If you listen carefully, you might even hear what they're saying: Sonic.x. It arrived in a manila envelope with no return address, a CD-ROM with the word Sonic written on it in black marker. Tom's friend Kyle had mailed it to him shortly before cutting off all contact, and the letter included was brief and disturbing. Kyle begged Tom not to play the game. He warned that it was not what it seemed, that something was wrong with it, that he had made a terrible mistake by playing it himself. Then the letter ended, and Kyle was never heard from again. Tom, naturally, played the game. At first, it appeared to be an ordinary Sonic the Hedgehog title, albeit one with strange variations. The title screen was slightly off, the colors too dark, the music too slow. When Tom selected the first save file, he found himself controlling Tails, Sonic's loyal companion, in a version of the Green Hill Zone that was darker, emptier, and silent. Then Sonic appeared. This was not the Sonic that Tom knew. This Sonic's eyes were black with red pupils that glowed like embers. His smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. He stood motionless as Tails approached, and when they met, the screen went dark. When the image returned, Tails was gone, and text appeared. "Hello, do you want to play with me?" The game forced Tom through 2 more scenarios, controlling Knuckles and then Dr. Robotnik, each time pursued by the corrupted Sonic through nightmarish landscapes. The characters could not escape. They could not fight back. They could only run until they couldn't run anymore. And then they too were taken. With each death, messages appeared on screen, taunting Tom directly, not the characters, but him, the player, as though the thing in the game knew it was being watched and wanted the watcher to understand what was coming. The entity identified itself as X, and it claimed to be God in its world. It had trapped the souls of the characters Tom had just played, and it wanted more. It wanted Tom himself. The game ended with Sonic's bloody, distorted face filling the screen and a message that followed Tom even after he turned off the computer, appearing in text files, in error messages, in his dreams. Sonic.exe was written by JC the Hyena in 2011, and while it is not considered one of the better written creepypastas, its influence on gaming horror was enormous. It established many of the tropes that would define the haunted game subgenre. The mysterious package from a friend who disappears, the game that seems to know it's being played, the corruption of beloved childhood characters into something malevolent. The story spawned countless fan games that recreated and expanded the experience, allowing players to actually encounter the corrupted Sonic and his victims. It also inspired thousands of similar stories featuring other video game characters transformed into monsters. Mario, Pokemon, even children's educational games were given the creepypasta treatment. The appeal of Sonic.exe and stories like it lies in the corruption of innocence. Sonic the Hedgehog is a symbol of childhood joy, of Saturday mornings and birthday parties and simple, colorful fun. To see that symbol twisted into something that wants to hurt you is deeply unsettling in a way that original horror characters cannot quite replicate. It takes something safe and makes it dangerous, something familiar and makes it alien. Perhaps that old game cartridge in your closet, the one you haven't played in years, is exactly as you remember it. Perhaps the characters will smile their friendly smiles, and the music will play just as it should. Or perhaps something has been waiting in there all this time, patient and hungry, hoping you'll decide to play one more time. Squidward's Suicide. The story is presented as the account of an intern at Nickelodeon who was present for the screening of what should have been a normal episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. The episode was titled Fear of a Krabby Patty and was meant to be part of the show's 4th season. But when the animators loaded the file, they immediately knew something was wrong. The title card did not read Fear of a Krabby Patty. It read Squidward's Suicide. The staff assumed it was a joke from one of the animators, dark humor that would be corrected before broadcast. They decided to watch it through. What they saw was not a joke. The episode began normally enough, with Squidward preparing for a clarinet recital. The concert went poorly, the audience booing and laughing at his performance. Squidward retreated to his bedroom, sat on his bed, and began to cry. The scene went on far longer than any normal SpongeBob scene, the sound of his sobbing the only audio. Then the image began to change. Squidward's eyes became realistic, hyper-detailed, red from crying in a way that looked less like animation and more like photography. The sobbing sound became deeper, less like a cartoon character and more like a real person in genuine distress. The staff grew uncomfortable, but continued watching, assuming this was still part of the joke. Then the footage began to skip, and for brief frames, images appeared that had no place in a children's cartoon. Real photographs, the story says, disturbing content that the narration does not describe in detail, but that left the staff deeply shaken. The episode cut back to Squidward, still crying, his realistic eyes now bleeding. A deep voice began to speak in the background, though the words were difficult to make out. The final shot was Squidward holding an object to his head. The staff heard the sound, and then the episode ended. The screening room was silent. The staff attempted to trace the file's origin, to find which animator had created this nightmare, but no one claimed responsibility, and the file's metadata offered no clues. The episode was destroyed, the incident hushed up, and the intern was left with a memory that has haunted them ever since. Squidward, also known as Red Mist, appeared on the internet around 2010 and quickly became one of the most discussed creepypastas. Like Candle Cove, it uses the format of a recovered account, a testimony about something that shouldn't exist. But it goes further into disturbing territory, implying not just supernatural horror, but real-world suffering embedded in the frames of a children's show. The story tapped into a growing fascination with lost episodes, supposedly real installments of television shows that were banned or destroyed due to disturbing content. This concept would inspire countless other creepypastas and eventually become a subgenre of its own, with lost episode stories created for everything from Rugrats to The Simpsons. The horror of Squidward's suicide, the horror of corruption hidden in plain sight, the idea that the media we consume might contain things we were never meant to see. It asks us to look more closely at the cartoons we watched as children, to wonder what might have been slipped into the frames when no one was watching. SpongeBob SquarePants continues to air, of course, bright and colorful and safe. But the story suggests that somewhere in the archives, on a hard drive or a tape that was never quite destroyed, the Red Mist episode still exists, waiting, in case anyone ever wants to see what really happened to Squidward. Some files are better left unopened. The Backrooms. The image appeared on 4chan in 2019, posted with a simple caption that would spawn an entire mythology. The photograph showed an interior space, but one that felt deeply wrong despite its apparent mundanity. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on walls covered in faded wallpaper. The carpet was the color of old mustard, stained and worn. The space seemed to go on forever, room after room after room, with no windows, no exits, no indication of where you were or how you might leave. The caption read, "If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you." That was all. A single image, a few sentences. But the concept struck something deep in the collective unconscious, and the Backrooms became one of the most rapidly expanding horror mythologies of the internet age. The premise taps into a very specific kind of fear, one that anyone who has ever walked through an empty office building or a deserted mall late at night might recognize. These are liminal spaces, transitional areas that feel wrong when they're empty, spaces designed for crowds that become eerie in their absence. The Backrooms take this feeling and extend it to infinity. Endless corridors, endless rooms, all identical, all empty, all humming with that fluorescent drone that begins to feel like it's coming from inside your own skull. Within months of the original post, the mythology had expanded enormously. Contributors established that the Backrooms existed as a space behind reality, a place you could fall into if reality glitched in just the wrong way. The term no-clip came from video games, where it describes a cheat that allows players to pass through solid walls. In the Backrooms mythology, it became a way of describing how people accidentally slip out of normal space and into this yellow hell. The community developed a system of levels, Level 0 was the original image, the endless yellow rooms with their buzzing lights and damp carpet smell. But there were other levels too, hundreds of them eventually, each with its own characteristics and dangers. Some were relatively safe, places where trapped wanderers could find supplies or temporary shelter. Others were actively hostile, filled with entities that hunted anyone unfortunate enough to stumble into their domain. These entities became a crucial part of the mythology. The original post mentioned hearing something wandering nearby, and contributors expanded this into an entire bestiary of creatures that inhabited the backrooms. Some were described as humanoid, others as masses of limbs or faces, others as things that couldn't be described at all. They were drawn to sound, to movement, to the presence of human consciousness in a place where humans were never meant to be. The backrooms phenomenon spread to YouTube, where creators produced found footage videos of explorations into the yellow corridors. Some were short and simple, just a camera moving through endless identical rooms until something appeared in the distance and the footage cut out. Others were elaborate productions with narrative arcs, characters trying to survive and escape, and increasingly creative interpretations of what the backrooms might contain. What makes the backrooms so compelling is the purity of its horror. There are no serial killers here, no demons or curses. There is only space itself, wrong space, too much of it, space that goes on forever without purpose or exit. It is the horror of being lost, of being alone, of being trapped in a place that should not exist. The yellow walls and buzzing lights are not inherently frightening, but their endless repetition transforms them into something maddening. Perhaps you felt it yourself, that odd sense of displacement when you walk through an empty parking garage or find yourself in a hotel corridor late at night. For a moment, the world feels thin, like you could fall through it if you stepped wrong. In the backrooms mythology, some people do fall through, and when they do, they find themselves in a place of yellow walls and humming lights, with 600 million square miles of nothing stretching out in every direction, and somewhere in all that nothing, something is moving, something that heard you arrive. Lavender Town Syndrome. In February of 1996, Pokemon Red and Green were released in Japan, and within weeks, according to legend, children began to die. The story goes that there was something wrong with the music in Lavender Town, a location in the game known for its somber atmosphere and its tower filled with the graves of deceased Pokemon. The music that played in Lavender Town was different from the rest of the game, slower and sadder, built on a melody that many players found unsettling. But in the original Japanese release, the story claims, the music contained something more than just an eerie tune. Certain frequencies were embedded in the composition, tones at the edge of human hearing that affected the developing minds of children in ways the composers never intended. Some versions of the story focus on binaural beats, sounds that create strange effects when heard through headphones. Others mention specific high-pitched tones that adults couldn't hear, but that children's more sensitive ears could detect. Whatever the cause, the effect was devastating. According to the legend, over 200 children took their own lives in the weeks following the game's release, with hundreds more reporting severe headaches, nosebleeds, and disturbing psychological symptoms. The Japanese government supposedly intervened, forcing Nintendo to alter the music before the game could be released internationally. The version that reached America and Europe had a different, safer composition for Lavender Town, and no further incidents occurred. It should be stated clearly that there is no evidence this ever happened. No records exist of a wave of child deaths in Japan in 1996. No government intervention has ever been documented. An analysis of the original Japanese music reveals no hidden frequencies or binaural beats. The Lavender Town Syndrome is a legend, a creepypasta that took on a life of its own because it sounded just plausible enough to spread. But the legend persists for a reason. The Lavender Town music is genuinely unsettling, a stark contrast to the bright and cheerful tones of the rest of the game. For many children playing Pokemon for the first time, it was their first encounter with a video game that acknowledged death, that had a graveyard and ghosts and a mood of genuine melancholy. The music stayed with them, lodging in their memories as something that felt wrong, something that perhaps shouldn't have been in a children's game. The Lavender Town Syndrome legend gave shape to that unease. It suggested that the discomfort players felt was not just psychological, but physical, that the music really was affecting them in ways they couldn't understand. It transformed a vague childhood memory into something more sinister, a conspiracy of sound and frequency, and minds too young to protect themselves. The story also tapped into anxieties about the effect of media on children, fears that video games might be doing something to young minds that adults couldn't see. In the 1990s, these fears were widespread, with video games frequently blamed for violence and antisocial behavior. The Lavender Town Syndrome took these anxieties and pushed them to an extreme conclusion. What if a game really could hurt children, not through content, but through something hidden in the code itself? The original Lavender Town music is available to listen to, of course, and people have been hearing it for nearly 30 years without incident. It's strange and sad, and perhaps not what you'd expect in a game about collecting colorful creatures, but it is just music. The frequencies are normal, the tones are safe. Still, if you listen to it late at night, with headphones on, in the dark, you might understand why the legend took hold. There's something in that melody that feels like it's reaching for something just outside your perception. Something you can almost hear, but not quite. Almost. Herobrine. He appears in the distance, motionless, watching. A figure that looks almost like the default player character of Minecraft, but with one crucial difference. His eyes are completely white, empty, without pupils or iris. By the time you move toward him, he is gone, but the signs of his presence remain. Trees stripped of their leaves, perfect pyramids built in the wilderness, tunnels dug through mountains, lit by torches that no player placed. Herobrine is perhaps the most famous legend in gaming history, a ghost in the machine who has haunted Minecraft since 2010, despite the fact that he has never existed in the game's code. The legend began with a single screenshot posted to the internet. It showed a Minecraft world, and there in the fog was a figure, human-shaped, watching the camera. The player who posted it claimed that he had been playing alone in a single-player world when he began noticing strange things. Trees with no leaves, odd constructions he hadn't built, and then this figure in the distance. When he tried to investigate, the figure always vanished. Then his game crashed, and when he logged back in, everything was normal, except for one detail. His save file had been renamed to Herobrine. The poster claimed to have contacted another player who had experienced the same phenomenon. Together, they researched the name Herobrine and discovered something disturbing. Herobrine was supposedly the username of Notch's brother, who had died years before. Somehow, his spirit had entered the game, or perhaps had been placed there deliberately, a ghost haunting the code in memory of someone lost. There was one problem with this story. Notch, the creator of Minecraft, does not have a brother. Notch himself responded to the legend, confirming that Herobrine was not real and had never been in the game. But he did so with a wink, adding fuel to the fire rather than extinguishing it. The changelogs for Minecraft updates began including the line, "Removed Herobrine," a joke that appeared again and again with each new version. The official denial became part of the mythology, suggesting that perhaps Herobrine was real and the developers were trying to cover it up, or perhaps they had tried to remove him, but he kept coming back. The Herobrine legend spread rapidly through the Minecraft community. Players reported sightings in their own worlds, strange constructions they hadn't built, the feeling of being watched while they played. Fan art depicted him as everything from a malevolent demon to a lonely spirit just wanting to play. Stories developed around him. He was a vengeful ghost. He was a corrupted AI. He was a fragment of deleted code that had somehow achieved consciousness. What makes Herobrine so enduring is the nature of Minecraft itself. The game generates its worlds procedurally, creating landscapes through algorithms rather than deliberate design. This means that sometimes the game creates things that look intentional, but aren't. Perfect geometric shapes in the terrain, unusual formations that seem too structured to be random. When players encounter these oddities, they might wonder if something put them there. They might think of Herobrine. The legend also speaks to the particular loneliness of single-player Minecraft. You are alone in an infinite world, the only conscious being in all that empty space. The idea that something else might be there, watching from the fog, is both terrifying and almost comforting. At least you wouldn't be alone. Herobrine has never existed and will never exist. He is a story, nothing more. But the next time you play Minecraft by yourself and see something in the distance, a shape that might be a player but couldn't be because you're alone, you might feel a small chill anyway. You might remember the white eyes and the empty face, and you might wonder, just for a moment, if he's finally found his way in. Momo. The image is unforgettable once you've seen it. A face that is almost human, but deeply, fundamentally wrong. Bulging eyes that seem too large for the skull. A mouth stretched into a smile that extends far beyond where a smile should end. Thin strands of dark hair framing features that belong in a nightmare. This is Momo, and for a brief period in 2018 and 19, she was the most feared image on the internet. The strange truth about Momo is that she was never meant to be a horror icon at all. The image is a photograph of a sculpture created by Japanese artist Keisuke Iso for the Link Factory studio. The sculpture was called Mother Bird and was displayed at a Tokyo art gallery in 2016. It depicted a figure from Japanese folklore, a ubum, the ghost of a woman who died in childbirth. Iso created her with the intention of being unsettling, but also sad, a spirit trapped between life and death, yearning for the child she never got to raise. Then the internet found her. The image began circulating on social media in 2018, divorced from its artistic context, presented simply as a terrifying face with no explanation. It spread through WhatsApp groups and Instagram accounts, accompanied by vague warnings about a Momo challenge that was supposedly targeting children. The challenge, according to panicked news reports and worried parents, worked like this. Children would receive messages from accounts using the Momo image, which would instruct them to complete increasingly dangerous tasks, culminating in self-harm. Schools sent warnings to parents. News stations ran segments on the danger. Police departments issued alerts. For several months, Momo was treated as a genuine threat to children around the world. But investigations by journalists, fact-checkers, and law enforcement found no evidence that the Momo challenge existed in any organized form. There were no documented cases of children being harmed by instructions from Momo accounts. The challenge appeared to be a moral panic, a fear that spread faster than anyone could verify, fueled by the genuinely disturbing nature of the image and by parents' understandable anxieties about what their children encountered online. This does not mean that no one ever used the Momo image maliciously. Once the panic began, some people did create accounts using the picture to frighten others, and some children were certainly scared by encountering it unexpectedly. But the elaborate challenge, with its escalating tasks and its targeting of vulnerable young people, was essentially a myth, a story we told ourselves about the dangers of the internet. The Momo phenomenon is interesting precisely because it shows how creepypasta and reality can blur together. The image was real art, taken out of context. The fear was real, felt by real parents and real children. The challenge was fictional, but the fiction was treated as fact by media organizations and authorities. Momo became a creepypasta that people believed was true, a horror story that escaped into the real world. Keisuke Iso destroyed the original Mother Bird sculpture in 2019, saddened by what his creation had become. He had meant to make something that evoked pity as well as fear, a tragic figure from folklore. Instead, his art became a symbol of internet horror, stripped of its meaning and used to frighten children. The image still circulates, of course. The internet doesn't forget. But the panic has faded, and Momo has taken her place alongside other creepypasta figures, a face that once terrified millions, now just one more monster in the gallery. Her bulging eyes still stare out from that photograph. That smile still stretches too wide. But she's just an image now, a piece of art made of rubber and latex. Nothing to be afraid of. Probably. Suicide Mouse, AV. The video begins innocuously enough, showing Mickey Mouse walking down a city street. The animation is crude, black and white, clearly very old. Mickey walks with his head down, his expression neutral, while buildings scroll past in the background. There is no sound except for the shuffle of his feet. This goes on for several minutes. Mickey walks, the buildings repeat, and nothing happens. A viewer might assume they were looking at a test animation, something never meant to be seen. A piece of discarded ephemera from Disney's early years. Then, around the 3-minute mark, things begin to change. A low hum appears on the soundtrack, barely perceptible at first, but gradually building. The image begins to degrade, static creeping in at the edges. Mickey continues walking, but his expression has shifted. He seems sad now, his steps heavier. The buildings in the background start to look wrong, their geometry distorted, their windows staring like empty eyes. By the 6th minute, the hum has become a drone, and faint sounds can be heard beneath it, whispers, or perhaps sobs, in a language that doesn't quite resolve into words. Mickey's mouth begins to move as though he is speaking, but no voice emerges. The static grows worse, and for brief flashes, images appear that don't belong in any Disney cartoon. They are there for only fractions of a second, not long enough to identify, but long enough to disturb. The final minute is the worst. The image is almost completely obscured by static, but Mickey is still visible, stopped now, facing the camera. His face has changed into something like a grin, but wrong, stretched, filled with too many teeth. The audio builds to a cacophony of screaming and distortion. Then, abruptly, it stops. Text appears on screen. The sights of hell bring its viewers back in. According to the story that accompanies the video, Suicide Mouse AVI was discovered in the Disney archives by a studio employee in the 1990s. The employee who viewed the complete video became deeply disturbed, muttering the phrase from the final frame before taking his own life. Disney suppressed the file, but somehow it made its way onto the internet, where it has been viewed by thousands of people who apparently suffered no ill effects. The video that circulates online is, of course, a recreation. It was created in 2009 by a user named Nisi1, who was inspired by the emerging genre of lost episode Creepypastas. The animation was made to look authentically old, and the degradation effects were carefully designed to suggest something genuinely corrupted. The actual Disney archives contain no such file, and no Disney employee has ever been harmed by viewing forgotten cartoons. But Suicide Mouse Davi endures because it speaks to something true about early animation. Those old cartoons, with their rubbery characters and their surreal gags, have always had an undercurrent of something unsettling. The way characters' bodies stretch and distort, the violence that is played for laughs, the sometimes nightmarish imagery that appears for a frame or two, all of it can feel strange when viewed through modern eyes. Suicide Mouse Avi takes that strangeness and pushes it into outright horror, suggesting that somewhere in those archives are things that were never meant to be seen. The video also plays with the idea of cursed media, content that harms those who view it. This concept stretches back centuries, from paintings that bring misfortune to their owners, to films that kill their cast and crew. In the internet age, it has been updated for digital files, for videos and images that pass from screen to screen carrying something malevolent in their code. You can watch suicidemouse.avi yourself if you search for it. The video is on YouTube and various hosting sites, and it will not hurt you. It's just a piece of creative fiction, well-made and atmospheric, but ultimately harmless. But perhaps, as you watch Mickey walk those endless streets, you might understand why the legend took hold. There is something sad in that little figure, something lonely in those repeated buildings and that empty soundtrack. If you listen closely to the static, you might almost hear words, and if you look closely at those flash frames, just for a moment, you might see something looking back. Ted the Caver. Long before creepypasta had a name, before the term existed, there was Ted the Caver. The story appeared in 2001 on an Angelfire webpage, presented as a blog, a journal kept by a man documenting his exploration of an unnamed cave. It is considered by many to be the first great horror story of the internet age, and reading it today, over 2 decades later, it remains deeply effective. The story begins simply. Ted is an amateur caver, someone who explores caves as a hobby with a small group of friends. They have discovered a new cave in an undisclosed location, one that doesn't appear on any maps. During their initial exploration, they find a narrow passage, too small to fit through, but when they press their faces to the gap, they feel air moving from the other side. There is more cave beyond, unexplored, untouched. They decide to come back with tools to widen the passage. The journal entries that follow document their attempts to break through. It is slow going, the rock harder than expected, and they can only work for a few hours at a time before exhaustion sets in. But they are making progress, and the air from beyond continues to flow, promising vast spaces waiting to be discovered. Then Ted begins to notice things. It starts with small details. He feels watched while working in the passage. He hears sounds that might be rocks settling, or might be something else. One of his friends refuses to return to the cave without explaining why, saying only that something feels wrong. Ted presses on, driven by curiosity, by the need to know what lies beyond. The passage is almost wide enough now. Just a little more. The breakthrough comes, and Ted squeezes through into the space beyond. What he finds is not what he expected. The cave continues, yes, but it has changed. The walls are too smooth. The passages seem almost deliberate, as though they were carved rather than formed naturally. He finds markings on the walls that might be symbols or might be nothing. He finds a hieroglyph that looks almost like a face. And he begins to hear something moving in the darkness ahead. The final journal entries are fragmentary, written by someone whose mental state is clearly deteriorating. Ted has become obsessed with the cave, returning again and again despite his fear, despite the warnings from his friends, despite the increasingly clear signs that something is in there with him. He writes of sounds getting closer, of a presence that he can feel but not see, of a growing certainty that he has disturbed something that should have been left alone. The journal ends abruptly. There is no conclusion, no explanation of what happened to Ted. The final entry describes his intention to return to the cave one more time, to go deeper than he has gone before. After that, nothing. The web page remains, preserved in internet archives, but its author has never updated it or explained what happened next. Ted the Caver works because of its format and its restraint. The blog structure makes it feel authentic, like something you might stumble across while browsing, a real person's real account of something that happened to them. The horror builds slowly, almost imperceptibly, through small details and growing unease rather than explicit scares. By the time Ted breaks through the passage and finds what's waiting beyond, the reader is already deeply unsettled, primed to fear whatever might be in that darkness. The story also taps into a very specific phobia, the fear of tight spaces, of being trapped underground, of crawling through passages so narrow that you cannot turn around and can barely breathe. For anyone who has ever felt a flutter of panic in an elevator or a crowded room, the descriptions of Ted squeezing through rock, his chest compressed, his movement measured in inches, are almost unbearable to read. And then there is the mystery. What did Ted find in the cave? What made those markings on the walls? What was the thing he heard moving toward him in the dark? The story provides no answers, and that absence has haunted readers for over 20 years. The cave is still out there, somewhere, unnamed and unmapped. The passage Ted widened is still open. Whatever he disturbed is still waiting. Abandoned by Disney. The story is presented as an urban exploration, a journey into a place that was never meant to be found. The narrator has traveled to North Carolina to investigate rumors of an abandoned Disney resort, a property called Mowgli's Palace that was built in the late 1990s and closed almost immediately. According to the stories, Disney has never acknowledged the resort's existence, and the site has been left to rot in the wilderness, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The narrator finds the location after some searching, a sprawling complex hidden behind overgrown roads and rusted gates. The buildings are exactly as described, resort structures in the distinctive Disney style, but weathered and decayed, their bright colors faded to gray. Vines crawl up the walls. Windows are broken. The parking lot has been cracked open by weeds and saplings. It looks like something out of a post-apocalyptic film, a place where the world ended and only the architecture remained. Inside, the narrator finds the remains of what must have been an impressive resort. Lobbies with grand staircases, hallways lined with doors to empty rooms, restaurants with tables still set for guests who never arrived. Everything is covered in dust and debris, but some things remain surprisingly intact. Animatronics sit in the corners, their movements stilled, but their faces still fixed in cheerful expressions. Character costumes hang in storage rooms, limp and deflated like shed skins. The deeper the narrator goes, the stranger things become. Messages appear on the walls, scrawled in what might be paint or might be something else. Abandoned by Disney, they read. Abandoned by God. The animatronics seem to watch as the narrator passes. The costumes seem to shift in the corner of the eye. And then there is the room in the basement, the room with the mascot suit that is not empty. What the narrator finds in that room is something that should not exist, something that Disney would never create and could never explain. It is a character, one of the famous ones, but wrong, corrupted, alive in a way that no costume should be. It speaks to the narrator. It asks a question. And then it shows the narrator what it really is beneath the costume. The narrator escapes. The story ends with them driving away, shaking, trying to process what they have witnessed. They leave Mowgli's palace behind, but they know they will never forget what was waiting there in the dark. Abandoned by Disney was written by Slimebeast and published in 2009. It became one of the most popular creepypastas of its era and spawned several sequels exploring other abandoned Disney properties and the entities that inhabit them. The story works because it takes something familiar, the Disney brand with its promises of magic and happiness, and corrupts it into something horrifying. There is also something deeply unsettling about the specific image of the abandoned theme park. These are places designed to create joy, to provide escape from the ordinary world, and seeing them empty and decaying feels like a violation of their purpose. The animatronics that once delighted children now sit frozen in the dark. The costumes that once brought characters to life now hang empty like corpses. The magic is gone, and something else has moved in. The story suggests that Disney knew about Mowgli's palace, that they deliberately abandoned it and erased it from their records because of what happened there. What that was exactly is never explained. The narrator only glimpsed part of it and fled. Whatever remains in those buildings is still there, still waiting, still wearing the shapes of characters that children love. Some places are abandoned for a reason. Some doors are better left unopened. And some questions, the story suggests, are better left unasked. Because whatever is wearing that costume might answer. No End House. The rules were simple. Walk through 9 rooms, make it to the end, win $500. The narrator, a man named David, first heard about No End House from a friend at a party. It was supposed to be a haunted house attraction, the scariest in the area, and no one had ever made it through all 9 rooms. $500 waited for anyone who could, but no one ever collected. David was skeptical, but intrigued. He decided to try. The house itself was ordinary from the outside, just a 2-story building in a quiet neighborhood. David entered through the front door and found himself in the first room, which contained nothing but a single chair and some fake cobwebs. He almost laughed. If this was supposed to be scary, he would have his $500 in no time. Room 2 was slightly more unsettling, with disturbing images on the walls and sounds coming from hidden speakers. Room 3 had animatronic figures that lunged from the shadows. Room 4 was completely dark, requiring David to feel his way through while things brushed against him in the blackness. Each room escalated in intensity, but David pressed on. It was just a haunted house. None of it was real. By room 5, David was no longer sure. The later rooms stopped feeling like attractions. They felt personal. David saw things he recognized, things from his own life, things that no haunted house designer could possibly know. He saw a figure that looked like his mother. He saw himself as a child. He saw things that he had done and things that had been done to him, memories he had buried, fears he had never spoken aloud. And yet he continued, because the door to the next room was always there, always open, always inviting him forward. Room 8 broke him. What he saw there, the story does not describe in full, only that it was the worst thing David had ever witnessed, worse than anything he could have imagined. He collapsed. He wept. He begged to be let out. But the only way out was forward, through the door to room 9. David entered the final room and found himself outside, standing in front of the house he had just walked through. He had made it. He had completed the challenge. But when he turned around, the house was gone. The street was gone. Everything was gone, except for another door, standing alone in an empty void. A door with a sign that read, Room 10. There was no prize. There was no end. There was only another room, and another after that, and another after that, forever. No End House was written by Brian Russell and published in 2011. It became one of the most acclaimed creepypastas of its time and was later adapted into the second season of the television series Channel Zero. The story works because of its structure, each room raising the stakes, each escalation making the reader wonder what could possibly come next. By the time David reaches room 8, the anticipation is almost unbearable. But the true horror of No End House is not in any individual room. It is in the concept itself, the idea that there is no end, that the challenge is impossible because it was never meant to be completed. The house doesn't want winners. It wants participants. It wants people to walk through its doors and keep walking forever, room after room after room, each one worse than the last, with no prize and no escape. Perhaps you felt something similar in your own life, the sense that you're being tested, that you're moving through challenges that never seem to end, that every time you think you've made it through, there's another door waiting. No End House takes that feeling and makes it literal. There is always another room. There is always something worse waiting, and there is no way out but forward, into the dark, into whatever comes next. Good luck. 1999. The story is framed as an investigation, a man in his 20s trying to piece together fragmented memories of something he saw as a child. The year was 1999, and the narrator, then a young boy in the small Canadian town of Caledon, stumbled across a strange television channel while flipping through the dial. The channel was called Caledon Local 21, and it appeared to be a public access station featuring homemade programming. One show in particular caught the narrator's attention. It was called Mr. Bear's Cellar, and it featured a man in a crude bear costume sitting in what looked like a basement, talking directly to the camera. The production values were almost non-existent, just the bear and the basement and the single camera. But something about it fascinated the young narrator. He began watching regularly. The show's content was strange. Mr. Bear would talk to the children watching at home, asking them questions, telling them to do things. Some requests were innocent. Touch your nose, spin around, wave at the screen. Others were more disturbing. Go to your parents' medicine cabinet, find a certain item, bring it to a certain place. The narrator, young and trusting, saw nothing wrong with this. He thought it was a game. Then children began to disappear. The narrator's memories of this time are incomplete, fragmented by trauma and the passage of years. But he remembers news reports about missing children in the Caledon area. He remembers his parents becoming frightened, keeping him inside, forbidding him from watching television. He remembers the channel disappearing one day, as if it had never existed. As an adult, the narrator becomes obsessed with uncovering the truth about Caledon Local 21. He finds others who remember the channel, who remember Mr. Bear, and his strange requests. He discovers that the children who disappeared had all been viewers of the show. He learns that the man in the bear costume used the show to identify and groom his victims, luring them to locations where he could take them. The investigation leads the narrator to the house where the show was filmed, to evidence of what happened there, and eventually to the fate of the man in the bear costume. The full truth is worse than he imagined, a story of manipulation and harm that the community buried and tried to forget. The narrator brings it into the light, but the knowledge does not bring him peace. Some of the children were never found. The man had help. And the narrator realizes that he himself came very close to becoming a victim, saved only by chance and his parents' vigilance. 1999 was written as a series of posts, presented as the narrator's ongoing investigation unfolding in real time. It is one of the most disturbing creepypastas ever written, because it deals not with supernatural horror, but with human evil, the real and terrible things that predators do to children. The story is fiction, but it echoes real cases of abuse and abduction, real monsters who use trust and authority to harm the vulnerable. The story works because of its restraint. It never describes the crimes in explicit detail. It focuses instead on the investigation, on the narrator's growing understanding of what happened and what almost happened to him. The horror is in the implication, in the spaces between the facts, in the realization of how many children were lost and what they must have suffered. Mr. Bear's cellar was not real. Caledon Local 21 never existed. But men like the one in the bear costume do exist, and they do use media and technology to reach children. The story reminds us of this terrible truth, wrapped in the format of a creepypasta, but carrying a warning that is all too real. Be careful what your children watch. Be careful who speaks to them through the screen. Not everyone who wears a friendly face is friendly. The expressionless. In 1972, a woman appeared at the emergency entrance of Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, covered in blood and wearing nothing but a white gown. That alone might not have been unusual for a hospital emergency room, but the staff noticed something immediately wrong. The woman was not quite human. Her features were too smooth, too perfect, like a mannequin's. Her face was entirely expressionless, showing no reaction to the chaos around her, no pain despite the blood soaking her gown. Her eyes did not blink. Her mouth did not move. She stood in the entrance and waited, and the staff, despite their unease, approached to help her. They tried to speak to her, but she did not respond. They tried to examine her, but she did not cooperate. She simply stood there, motionless, expressionless, her blank face watching them with eyes that reflected nothing. One doctor noted that she resembled a department store mannequin that someone had attempted to make look human without understanding what humans actually looked like. The uncanny valley made flesh. The blood on her gown was not hers. Analysis would later reveal that it came from an animal, possibly a cat or a dog, though its origin was never definitively identified. The woman herself appeared to be uninjured. But the staff remained deeply disturbed by her presence, by the wrongness of her features, by the absolute absence of expression on her face. Then she moved. What happened next was witnessed by multiple staff members, but never officially reported. The woman's mouth opened, revealing a set of teeth that were not human teeth, not animal teeth, something else entirely, something designed for one purpose only. She attacked. Before she could be stopped, members of the staff were harmed, some severely. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone, fleeing the hospital with speed that no human body should possess. She was never seen again. The hospital never acknowledged the incident. The staff who witnessed it were discouraged from speaking about what they saw. But the story leaked out over the years, passed from person to person, eventually finding its way to the internet, where it became one of the most unsettling creepypastas of the modern era. The image associated with the story shows a figure in a hospital gown, its face blank and mannequin-like, its mouth beginning to open. The photograph is, of course, edited, but it captures something of the wrongness the story describes, the horror of something that looks almost human but is not. The expressionless works because it taps into deep fears about authenticity and identity. We trust that we can recognize humans, that we know our own species when we see it. The expressionless suggests that this trust is misplaced, that something could walk among us wearing a human face without actually being human. It might be in the hospital when you arrive for help. It might be in the crowd you walk through every day. Its face would give nothing away because its face is incapable of giving anything away. It is wearing humanity like a mask, and beneath the mask is something hungry. The story never explains what the expressionless was or where it came from. It offers no origin, no motive, no rules for how it behaves. It was simply there one night, and then it was gone, leaving only blood and trauma behind. It might still be out there, walking through emergency rooms, standing in crowds, watching with those eyes that never blink. If you see someone whose face is too smooth, too perfect, too still, you should probably look away. Don't let it know that you've noticed. Don't let it know that you can see. Gateway of the Mind. In 1983, a team of scientists conducted an experiment to find God. The premise was simple, if extreme. The researchers believed that human beings possessed an innate ability to perceive the divine, but that this ability was blocked by the constant input from our physical senses. We are so overwhelmed by what we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell that we cannot perceive the spiritual realm that exists beyond these sensations. If the senses were removed, the researchers theorized, the mind would be free to perceive God directly. They found a volunteer, an elderly man who was deeply religious and terminally ill, who agreed to undergo the procedure in exchange for the chance to commune with his Creator before he died. The surgery was extensive and irreversible. His eyes were surgically removed, his ears were destroyed, his nose and tongue were rendered non-functional. Every nerve ending that could transmit touch was severed. When the procedures were complete, the man existed in total sensory deprivation, his mind sealed inside his body with no input from the outside world. For the first few days, the man reported nothing unusual. He was uncomfortable, disoriented, but his mind remained clear. He could still speak, and the researchers recorded everything he said, waiting for signs of the divine contact they hoped to achieve. On the fourth day, the man began to report sounds. This was impossible, of course. His ears had been destroyed, but he insisted he could hear whispers, distant voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize. The researchers were encouraged. Perhaps this was the beginning of the spiritual perception they had predicted. On the sixth day, the man began to scream. He screamed for hours, stopping only when his voice gave out completely. When he could speak again, he told the researchers what he had perceived. He had not found God. He had found something else entirely. In the absence of sensory input, his mind had reached out into the void, and the void had reached back. What he perceived there was not divine. It was not benevolent. It was something that had been waiting for a mind to open itself completely, to make itself vulnerable, to become a gateway. The man begged to be killed. He begged for his senses to be restored, even though this was impossible. He told the researchers that they had to close the gateway, that something was coming through, that he could feel it moving through his mind and into the world. His final words, spoken in a voice that the researchers later claimed did not quite sound like his own, suggested that the experiment had succeeded in a way they never intended. He had not found God, but he had confirmed that something else existed in the darkness, and it had been waiting a very long time for someone to open the door. The Gateway of the Mind is one of the most philosophically unsettling creepypastas because it inverts the expected narrative. In most stories about seeking the divine, the search either succeeds or fails. Here, it succeeds in finding something, just not what was sought. The story suggests that the universe contains presences that are neither good nor evil, but simply other, things that exist outside human understanding and human morality, things that we would be better off never perceiving. The horror is also in the violation of the body, in the idea of having your senses stripped away one by one until you are trapped in the darkness of your own skull. The man volunteered for this, believed it would bring him closer to God, and instead found himself alone in the dark, with something that should never have been found. Some doors are locked for a reason. Some questions should never be answered. And some experiments, no matter how noble their intentions, open gateways that can never be closed again. The void is not empty. It is patient, and it is always listening for minds that make themselves open. Anansi's Goatman story. The story is told as a memory, an account of a camping trip that went wrong in ways the narrator still struggles to understand years later. It was supposed to be a simple weekend in the woods, a group of friends getting away from their lives for a few days. There were 8 of them, or maybe 9. The narrator can't quite remember. That uncertainty is the first sign that something is wrong. They drove out to a remote area, set up camp, and settled in for a night of drinking and talking around the fire. Everything was fine at first. The woods were quiet, the stars were bright, and the friends were happy to be together. Then, as the night wore on, one of them began to feel uneasy. It started with small things. Someone would tell a joke, and everyone would laugh. But there seemed to be one too many voices in the laughter. Someone would ask who wanted another drink, and the count would come up wrong. The narrator began to feel that there was someone in their group who wasn't supposed to be there, someone who was sitting with them, and talking with them, and laughing with them, but who wasn't one of them. The friends began to notice too. Glances were exchanged. Conversations became strained. No one wanted to say anything directly, because how could you accuse someone of not being real? How could you point to one of your friends and say that they weren't who they appeared to be? But the feeling grew, and as it grew, the group began to fracture. The narrator describes a growing paranoia, a sense that any one of the people around the fire might be the intruder. Old friends looked at each other with suspicion. Conversation stopped when certain people approached. Someone suggested they should all leave, but no one wanted to turn their back on the group, and no one wanted to be alone in the woods with whatever was out there. Then people started disappearing. The narrator's memory of what happened next is fragmented, confused. People left the campsite and didn't come back. Sounds came from the woods that might have been human voices, or might have been something imitating human voices. By the end of the night, the group was scattered, hiding in the darkness, no longer sure who among them was real and who was the thing that had joined them. The Goatman of the story's title is a creature from American folklore, a being that can take human form and infiltrate groups, mimicking the appearance and behavior of one of the members. In some versions, it can only copy someone who is already present, creating a duplicate that is almost but not quite right. In others, it simply joins the group as an extra member, relying on the confusion of numbers and the politeness of social interaction to avoid detection. Anansi's Goatman story was posted to 4chan's paranormal board in 2012 and quickly became one of the most discussed creepypastas of its era. Its power lies in the simplicity of its central concept, the fear that someone in your CICD group is not who they appear to be. This fear is ancient, reflected in folklore about changelings and shapeshifters, but the story updates it for a modern setting, a camping trip with friends, and makes it terrifyingly plausible. The story also captures the particular horror of social breakdown, the way paranoia can destroy trust and turn friends into strangers. Even if there was no Goatman, even if the intruder was imaginary, the fear of it was enough to tear the group apart. In that sense, the monster won simply by being suspected. The narrator survived, obviously, or the story couldn't be told. But they never found out for certain what happened that night, whether the Goatman was real, whether it took their friends, whether it might still be out there, waiting for the next group to make camp in those woods. If you go camping with friends, count your group before you leave. Count them again when you arrive. And if the numbers don't match, if there's one too many faces around the fire, if someone's laugh doesn't quite sound like their own, then you should leave. Immediately, before it realizes you've noticed. Normal for normal people. The website was called normalfornormalpeople.com, and according to the story, it was anything but normal. The narrator first encountered the site when a friend sent them a link with no explanation. The site itself was minimalist, just a white background with black text reading, "Normal porn for normal people," a website dedicated to the encyclopedic study of the encyclopedic practice of the second step. Beneath the text were links to video files with simple names: Pim.av, Diana AV, Jessica AV. The narrator clicked on the first video, expecting porn as the site's name suggested. What they found was something else entirely. The video showed a woman standing in a kitchen making a sandwich. That was all. She made a sandwich, ate it, and the video ended. The narrator clicked another video. This one showed a man painting a wall. Another showed someone mowing a lawn. The videos were mundane, completely non-sexual, and profoundly pointless. And yet something about them felt wrong. The narrator began to investigate, searching for information about the site and finding others who had encountered it. A community of curious people had formed, sharing videos and trying to understand what the site was for. As they dug deeper, they began to find videos that were less mundane. One showed a man brushing a woman's hair for an uncomfortably long time, his expression intense, her expression blank. Another showed people in animal masks, having what appeared to be a tea party, their movements jerky and unnatural. Then they found the video called Useless.av. The narrator does not describe the contents of Useless.av in full, only that it was deeply disturbing and appeared to show something genuinely harmful happening to a person. The video confirmed what the community had begun to suspect. The site was not a joke or an art project. It was something else, something that started with mundane footage and gradually introduced darker and darker content, a progression that seemed designed to desensitize viewers, or perhaps to test how far they would go. The site eventually disappeared from the internet, and investigations into its origin led nowhere. The narrator was left with questions that would never be answered. Who created the site? What was its purpose? And what was the second step it claimed to be dedicated to? Normal people is effective because of its structure, the gradual escalation from boring to bizarre to horrifying. It mirrors the way real disturbing content often exists on the internet, hidden behind layers of obscurity, accessible to those who look hard enough but invisible to casual users. The story suggests that dark corners of the web contain things that most people will never see, but that are nonetheless there, waiting to be found. The title itself is unsettling, the insistence that something is normal when it clearly is not. It speaks to the way harmful content is often rationalized or disguised, presented as acceptable when it is anything but. The viewers who explored the site found themselves drawn deeper and deeper, their curiosity overriding their discomfort, until they saw things they could never unsee. Some websites are better left unvisited. Some links are better left unclicked. And some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. The site is gone now. Probably. But the internet has a long memory, and files have a way of resurfacing when you least expect them. If you ever receive a link to a website dedicated to the encyclopedic study of the second step, you would be wise to delete it without clicking. You don't want to know what the second step is. Pen pal. It begins with the balloons. The narrator, looking back on his childhood from adulthood, remembers a school project from when he was very young. The children were asked to write letters, attach them to helium balloons, and release them into the sky, hoping that someone would find them and write back. The narrator was excited. He wrote his letter, released his balloon, and waited. Someone did write back. The letter that arrived was simple, just a few words, but the narrator was thrilled. He had made a friend. He wrote another letter, sent it the same way, and received another response. A correspondence developed, though the narrator's memory of what the letters said has faded over time. He remembers only that he had a pen pal, someone out there who was interested in him, who wanted to know about his life. Then the pictures started appearing. The narrator's mother found photographs that had been taken of the narrator while he slept. She found photographs taken through windows, photographs of the narrator at school, photographs that showed someone had been watching him for a long time. The narrator was too young to understand what this meant, but his mother understood. She called the police. She increased security. She did everything she could to protect her son. But the pen pal didn't stop. The story unfolds over 6 chapters, each one revealing more of what happened during the narrator's childhood and how close he came to disaster without ever knowing it. There were incidents he didn't understand at the time, waking up in strange places with no memory of how he got there, seeing a figure in the woods behind his house, losing friends who moved away suddenly and never explained why. As an adult, the narrator pieces these fragments together and realizes the truth. Someone was stalking him throughout his childhood, someone who found him through that first balloon, someone who became obsessed with him and would not let go. The climax of the story reveals what happened to the narrator's childhood friend Josh, a tragedy that the narrator never understood at the time, but that takes on new and terrible meaning in light of what he has learned. The pen pal was responsible. The pen pal had been there all along, watching, waiting, taking. Pen pal was written by Dathan Auerbach and originally posted as a series of stories on Reddit's No Sleep forum in 2011. It was later expanded into a novel, but the original post remains some of the most acclaimed horror writing to emerge from the internet. The story works because of its perspective. Everything is told from the point of view of a child who doesn't understand what's happening, who sees only fragments and oddities that don't add up until years later. The horror is in the realization, in the adult narrator finally understanding what he was too young to see. The story also captures the particular vulnerability of childhood, the way children trust the world and the people in it, the way they can be in danger without ever knowing it. The narrator's mother saw the signs and tried to protect him, but she couldn't be everywhere, couldn't see everything. The pen pal was patient. The pen pal had time. Pen pal is often called the best creepypasta ever written, and it's easy to see why. It is not about monsters or ghosts, but about human evil, the kind that is patient and methodical and terrifyingly real. It is about the things that happen to children when adults aren't watching, and about the adults those children become, still carrying the weight of what they didn't understand. The narrator survived. Not everyone did, and somewhere out there, perhaps, the pen pal is still looking for balloons. Who was phone? And now, to close our journey, a story of a different kind. A girl was alone in her house, babysitting for the evening. The children were asleep, and she settled onto the couch to watch television. The phone rang. She answered it, and a voice on the other end whispered that he was coming for her. She hung up, frightened. The phone rang again. The same voice, the same threat. She called the police, who told her they would trace the call. Minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was the police. Their voices were urgent. The calls were coming from inside the house. She needed to get out immediately. She ran. She escaped. The children were saved. The killer was caught. And as she stood outside, shaking, she realized she had forgotten to ask one important question. But then who was phone? The story known as Who Was Phone has become one of the most famous creepypastas, not because it is good, but because it is spectacularly, gloriously bad. The original tale is a mangled retelling of the classic urban legend of the babysitter and the man upstairs. But the writing is so poor, the grammar so broken, and the final line so nonsensical that it transcended its origins and became a meme. But then, who was phone? Makes no grammatical sense. It answers a question no one asked. It implies that the phone itself was somehow a character in the story. Perhaps the true villain all along. And yet, or perhaps because of this, the line lodged itself in the internet's collective memory and refused to leave. Who Was Phone is a reminder that creepypasta is not just about sophisticated horror and elaborate mythologies. It is also about community, about shared jokes, about the pleasure of finding something so bad that it becomes good again. The story has been referenced, parodied, and remixed countless times. It has become a shorthand for failed horror writing, but also, in a strange way, a beloved part of the genre's history. So as you drift toward sleep, having heard tales of stalkers and monsters, of haunted games and abandoned places, of things that wear human faces and things that wait in the dark. Let this be your final thought. Sometimes the scariest thing is not what hides in the shadows. Sometimes it is not the unknown entity, or the corrupted file, or the door that should never be opened. Sometimes the scariest thing is a question that makes no sense, asked by someone who doesn't understand what they're asking, left hanging in the air without answer or explanation. But then who was phone? The world may never know, ever.